This video is about a letter from the King and Queen of Spain to the Grand Khan of a now mythical kingdom called Tartaria. In the current version of history, Tartaria is now Russia, China, or Mongolia, and it has always been Russia, China, or Mongolia, even though books from the 19th century, maps, and historical accounts mention Tartary as if it were a real place. While I was researching Christopher Columbus and how Spanish history was copied into American history, I came across the Spanish letter to the Grand Khan of Tartary, which I'll show later. But before we get to Columbus, let's start with the myth of Tartary. This is a declassified document from the CIA that talks about how Tartaria was wiped from history. Now, if the version of history you were taught includes Tartaria, this probably doesn't apply to you, but I didn't learn about Tartary, nor the Tartars, but I did know about their sauce. What's revealing about this document is it presents a good contrast between the two versions of history, the version with Tartary and the version without. And it also sets a date that we can use to see if in fact Tartary appears historically after World War II. It also demonstrates the contrast between how history is treated by the different explanations of what happened. In one case, we get a mouthful of nonsense. To proceed to a scientific revision of history of Tartaria to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tartar history. Next, we get the translation from the straight-talking American, where he says, Tartar history was to be rewritten, let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of Tartar-Russian relations. This suggests that at that time, the Tartary erasure was isolated to Russia, and their style of historic interpretation was to distort the facts, so they always present themselves in a good light. It goes on to talk about the Muslim influence in Russia, which to me makes sense now that I look at the architecture that has obvious Islamic influences. So if this document is dated correctly, it would seem to prophesize the current version of American history that always presents America in a good light. In this case, a conquest by Cristobal Colon becomes a discovery by Christopher Columbus, and that's what brought me to the book. The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. This book was basically the foundation of the Columbus myth that was later used in textbooks to deify a Spanish explorer who had nothing to do with America. It opens with the explanation of how the author went to Spain to copy and translate Colon into Columbus, transforming a Spanish conqueror into an Italian hero. This book did, however, include the story of Columbus's desire to meet the Grand Khan of Tartary, and that he was provided a letter from the monarchs in Spain for the Grand Khan himself. Much of Columbus' information started with Marco Polo. In the current version of history, Marco Polo went to Mongolia, not Tartary, and Genghis Khan and his horde were savages. Here we read, one of the great objects held out by Columbus in his undertaking was the propagation of the Christian faith. He expected to arrive at the extremity of Asia at the vast and magnificent empire of the Grand Khan, and to visit the dependent islands of which he had read such glowing accounts in the writings of Marco Polo. He later makes references to the fact that there was also previous information about the Grand Khan. In addition, we have information from the 13th century where we have three different sources that speak of the Grand Khan of Tartary, and for some reason it was lost until the 15th century and then revived by Columbus. There were also the narratives of Carpini and Acilin, two friars dispatched, the one in 1246, the other in 1247 by Pope Innocent IV, as apostolistic ambassadors for the purpose of converting the Grand Khan of Tartary, and the journal of William Ruybroeck, or Ruybroeck, a celebrated courtier sent on a similar errand in 1253 by Louis IX of France. The Catholic monarchs had different motivations regarding Tartaria. Here we read, according to the doctrines of the day, every nation that refused to acknowledge the truths of Christianity was fair spoil for a Christian invader. and it is probable that Ferdinand was more stimulated by the accounts given by Columbus of the wealth of Mangi, Cathay, and other provinces belonging to the Grand Khan than by any anxiety for the conversion of him and his semi-barbarous subjects. Isabella had nobler inducements. She was filled with pious zeal at the ideal of effecting such a great work of salvation. From different motives, therefore, both of the sovereigns accorded with the views of Columbus in this particular, and when he afterwards departed on his voyage, letters were actually given him for the Grand Khan of Tartary. The letter to Tartaria. Ferdinand and Isabella, King and Queen of Castile, Leon, Aragon, to the King, the Grand Khan of Tartaria. We have heard that your highness and your subjects have a great affection for us and the Spanish state. We are also aware that you are very desirous of information concerning us. We have therefore determined to send you our Admiral Christopher Columbus, the bearer of this, from whom you will learn that we're in good health and in most prosperous fortune. We have commanded him to tell you certain things on our behalf, and we pray you to give him full faith and credence as you would to ourselves. We shall be most grateful for any information you may send us concerning your state and the welfare of your subjects. Here we have information that affirms both the CIA letter and the Islamic architecture in Russia. It was assumed that Arabic was the mother of all languages, so he brought an interpreter who spoke Hebrew and Arabic to communicate with the Khan's court. Here we have another historical correction, because on Columbus' first voyage, he thought he was in Tartary, not India. Although it was supposed that the countries just discovered were part of the territories of the Grand Khan and of other Oriental princes considerably advanced in civilization, yet there does not appear to have been the least of doubt of the right of their Catholic majesties to take possession of them. During the Crusades, a doctrine had been established among the Christian princes extremely favorable to their ambitious designs. According to this, they had the right to invade, ravage, and seize upon the territories of all infidel nations under the plea of defeating the enemies of Christ and extending the sway of his holy church on earth. Finally, we have an explanation of their ultimate plan, which was to penetrate into Mangi and Cathay, convert, or what was the same thing, conquer the Grand Khan, and thus open a glorious career of arms among the splendid countries and semi-barbarous nations of the East. So this myth story presents two versions of history, one with Tartary that existed around the 19th century up until about 1944, and our current version of history where lands and people are renamed and their history is absorbed into the new identity. So, has Tartaria become a mythical place, or was it ever a place? Let me know in the comments what you think, and thanks for watching.